1970 was both the peak and beginning of the downfall for American muscle cars. It was the last hurrah before insurance crackdowns, federal emission standards, and the oil crisis swept in and killed the high-compression gas-guzzling beasts that had ruled the streets. Automakers poured everything into their 1970 lineups: outrageous styling, the biggest engines ever, and the wildest colors. But by 1971, the end had already begun. Here are 13 incredible muscle cars from 1970 that roared to life and then were made to disappear.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 13, the 1970 Buick GS Stage 455, a muscle car that quietly delivered immense power in a gentleman's suit, but was ultimately outshined by louder, brasher competitors. Today we're discussing one of the most surprising cars of the Golden Muscle era, the 1970 Buick GS Stage 455. While names like Chevel SS, GTO, and Hemi Cuda dominate the conversation when it comes to early 1970s muscle, the GS Stage 1 remains a powerful, yet underappreciated contender, a torque monster in a luxury wrapper. We'll examine its origins, performance, design, and its unfortunate fade into obscurity as the muscle era collapsed. This is the story of how Buick, a brand known for retirees and soft rides, briefly built one of the fastest muscle cars of the era. To understand the GS Stage 1, we need to grasp Buick's brand identity leading up to 1970. Buick was GM's premium brand below Cadillac, known for smooth, quiet, well-appointed cars. By the mid-1960s, however, every division at GM wanted a slice of the muscle car pie. Pontiac had the GTO, Chevrolet had the Chevel SS, Oldsmobile had the 444, so Buick needed an answer. Buick responded with the Grand Sport GS lineup, initially as an option on the Skylark. While earlier versions offered solid performance, 1970 was Buick's peak. For 1970, GM lifted its internal restriction that limited A-body intermediates to engines under 400 cubic inches. Buick wasted no time taking advantage of the rule change. The result was the 1970 Buick GS 455, a mid-size car with a massive 455 cubic inch V8 shoehorned under the hood, based on the Skylark platform but with subtle aggression. Twin hood scoops, wide stance, and restrained chrome trim, available in coupe or convertible form. Not flashy, no wild graphics or screaming colors. It looked mature. This was muscle for grown-ups. The Stage 1 performance package took the already impressive GS 455 and made it a legitimate street beast. Advertised horsepower, 360 horsepower, SAE gross, at 4,600 RPM. Torque, 510 pound-feet at 2,800 RPM. The highest torque rating of any American production car in 1970. Upgraded camshaft, valves, and carburation. Despite the conservative rating, real-world testing revealed that Stage 1 cars were underrated. This wasn't just good for a Buick, it was elite-level performance by any standard. What made the GS Stage 1 unique was its refined demeanor. Inside, you didn't get vinyl buckets and a slapstick shifter, you got power windows and seats, optional air conditioning, wood grain dash trim, smooth, near-silent idle, comfortable ride quality, even with the heavy-duty suspension. This was a gentleman's muscle car. So why didn't the GS Stage 1 get the glory it deserved? Buick simply didn't scream muscle car to the youth market. Teenagers weren't buying $4,000 Buicks when they could get a base Chevel SS or a Plymouth Duster for much less. No racing stripes, no shaker hood, no loud badging. It looked more like your dad's Skylark than a drag strip menace. GS 455 Stage 1 could cost $4,300, $4,600 with options. That was dangerously close to the Cadillac Calais territory. Insurance companies also took one look at the 455 and jacked up premiums. So while muscle fans respected it, the GS Stage 1 flew under the radar for most casual buyers. After 1970, the GS Stage 1's fate mirrored that of the entire muscle car era. 1971 saw compression ratios drop due to unleaded fuel and emissions regulations. Horsepower ratings declined, 345 horsepower net in 1971, even less later. Insurance premiums skyrocketed. By 1974, the GS was just a trim package with no special performance edge. The GS Stage 1 returned briefly in name, but the fire was gone. Buick refocused on full-size personal luxury cars, eventually leading to models like the Riviera and Regal. Number 12, the 1972 Plymouth Satellite Sebring Plus 400, a car that tried to merge performance heritage with upscale intentions, but fizzled out in the process. Today's subject is one of the more forgotten efforts from the twilight years of the muscle car era, the 1972 Plymouth Satellite Sebring Plus 400. Chrysler tried to pivot here, away from raw muscle and into something more refined, more sophisticated, yet still quick. Unfortunately, this plan didn't land with buyers, and the car fell between two stools. Not muscular enough for enthusiasts, not premium enough for luxury buyers. Let's begin by setting the scene. By 1972, the muscle car market was beginning to collapse. Insurance premiums on high-horsepower cars had skyrocketed. Government emissions regulations were choking performance. Rising gas prices and safety mandates started to change buyer priorities. Chrysler, seeing this shift, tried to reposition its offerings. Instead of raw, juvenile performance like the 1968-70 Roadrunner, the new strategy was to repackage power inside comfort and styling, more in line with the growing personal luxury segment. That's where the Satellite Sebring Plus 400 came in, a car meant to replace performance with presentation and deliver respectable power with added refinement. The Plymouth Satellite line was the mid-size offering in the Chrysler lineup, sitting above the entry-level Valiant Duster and below the full-size Fury. The Sebring Plus trim, introduced in 1971, was the more upscale version of the Satellite Coupe. Think more chrome, better upholstery, vinyl roofs, optional wood grain interior accents, sporty trim, but not in-your-face muscle graphics. The Plus meant a better appointed interior and fancier touches, in a car that still looked vaguely aggressive with its long hood and short deck proportions. The 400 cubic inch V8 was new for 1972 and slotted between the small block 318 340ns and the larger 440 Magnum. Specs of the 400 4-barrel V8, net horsepower, around 190-255 horsepower, depending on tuning. Torque, 2-310-350 pound-feet T, offered as the optional top engine in the Sebring Plus. On paper, the Satellite Sebring Plus 400 should have been a solid performer, not a drag strip terror, but torquey enough for spirited driving. But in reality, emissions restrictions, lower compression, 8.2, and gross to net horsepower conversions made the numbers and the driving experience underwhelming. This car was no Roadrunner. It was a boulevard cruiser with muscle pretensions, and that didn't fool anyone. Plymouth gave the Sebring Plus a body that looked ready to compete in the personal luxury class. Curvaceous fuselage styling, hit headlamps optional, available vinyl roof and upper windows, plush bucket seats and simulated wood grain trim. It aimed to go toe-to-toe with cars like the Monte Carlo and Ford Grand Torino. Ironically, the Satellite Sebring Plus was meant to carry the performance image as Plymouth softened the Roadrunner. By 1972, the Roadrunner had become more of a trim level than a performance monster. The Sebring Plus, especially with the 400 or 440, was supposed to appeal to more mature buyers who had outgrown the loud decals and spoilers. Performance buyers ignored it. It wasn't fast or mean-looking. Luxury buyers passed. They could get more prestigious names with better appointments. The result? Sluggish sales. The Sebring Plus 400 just didn't carve out a clear identity. The exact production numbers for 1972 Sebring Plus models equipped with the 400 V8 are hard to pinpoint, but they were low relative to Plymouth's sales goals. The Chevy Monte Carlo was a hit. The Ford Torino was outselling the Satellite. Even within Chrysler, the Dodge Charger overshadowed the Sebring in terms of brand recognition and muscle heritage. By 1974, the Satellite line was completely redesigned, with even bulkier proportions, and the Sebring Plus quietly disappeared shortly afterward. The muscle luxury experiment had failed. Number 11, the 1971 AMC Matador Machine. a one-year oddity that tried and failed to keep AMC's muscle car dreams alive during a time of shifting market realities. Today, we explore a car that represents the tail end of a bold underdog performance experiment, the 1971 AMC Matador Machine. Most people remember the 1970 Rebel Machine, a red-white-blue brute that earned respect. But far fewer even know its successor existed. With the Matador Machine, AMC tried to maintain its muscle branding, but the timing was wrong, the car was poorly marketed, and the audience had moved on. The result was a short-lived and largely forgotten muscle sedan. Let's examine why AMC even bothered, what the Matador Machine was, and why it failed so quickly. To understand the Matador Machine, we need to revisit American Motors' muscle strategy in the late 1960s and early 70s. AMC was always the smallest of the big four automakers. With limited resources, they leaned into niche appeal and attitude. In 1968, they offered the AMX, a two-seat sports car. In 1970, they built the Rebel Machine, a 340 horsepower, loud-colored muscle sedan with a hood scoop and attitude. These cars helped AMC shake off its conservative image and attract young buyers. The Rebel Machine gained some credibility on the street and drag strip, but by 1971, the Rebel name was gone, replaced by a more streamlined line, Matador. So AMC took the formula for the Rebel Machine and adapted it to the new Matador platform, hoping lightning would strike twice. It didn't. The Matador was AMC's new midsize car in 1971, larger than the compact Hornet and smaller than the full-size Ambassador. As a replacement for the Rebel, it came in coupe, sedan, and wagon variants. The Machine package was a performance trim offered for the Matador Coupe only. Key features: 401 cubic inch V8 6.6 liters rated at 330 horsepower, heavy-duty suspension, dual exhausts, machine graphics and striping, dealer-installed or optional, bucket seats and floor shifter with a center console, rally wheels and raised white-letter tires. However, unlike the 1970 Rebel Machine, which had a factory-installed performance image, the Matador Machine lacked visual identity. There was no bold hood scoop, no patriotic paint job, no factory brochures even promoted it. It was a stealth muscle car in a year when the muscle car scene was already dying. The Matador Machine was never given a standalone model designation. It was a rare option package, making production numbers extremely low, estimated at fewer than 1,000 units, possibly far less. After 1971, the Machine branding was dropped entirely. AMC abandoned the muscle game and focused instead on the compact Gremlin, the innovative Pacer, and later the successful Jeep line after acquiring Kaiser Jeep. The Matador itself would live on into the late 1970s. The 1971 Matador Machine is one of the most obscure muscle cars of the era. It's not sought after by collectors, rarely mentioned in muscle car books, difficult to verify even when found due to the lack of specific badging and documentation. However, for AMC fans, it represents the final gasp of performance bravado before reality caught up to the brand. The Rebel Machine may be the legend, but the Matador Machine is the forgotten epilogue, a reminder that even bold ideas can fade when the market turns cold. The 1971 AMC Matador Machine was a car caught in the middle of an identity crisis and a marketplace in transition. AMC tried to repeat its 1970 success, but with a heavier car, quieter styling, and no clear marketing strategy, the Matador Machine never had a chance. It was muscle at the wrong time, in the wrong suit, on the wrong stage. Today it's a curiosity, a muscle sedan that nobody remembers, but one that says a lot about the death of the muscle era and the struggle of underdog brands like AMC to keep up. Number 10, the 1973 Pontiac Grand Am 455, a bold experiment in blending luxury and muscle, one that ultimately got lost in its own ambition and the changing automotive landscape of the early 1970s. Today we'll explore a fascinating moment in Pontiac history, the debut of the 1973 Grand Am 455, a car born out of ambition, caught in transition, and ultimately a victim of timing and identity confusion. The Grand Am tried to merge GTO-style performance with Grand Prix-style luxury into a new type of car, a refined muscle machine for the maturing enthusiast. Unfortunately, 1977 was a rough year for such ambition. Insurance hikes, emissions regulations, fuel crises, and shifting buyer tastes all worked against it. This is the story of a car that tried to be everything and ended up being almost forgotten. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Pontiac was flying high with cars like the GTO, muscle car king, the Firebird, pony car rival to the Mustang, the Grand Prix, a luxurious personal coupe. But by 1973, the market was changing fast. Muscle cars were dying, choked by emissions regulations, rising insurance premiums, and gas prices. Buyers were aging and wanted more comfort without losing power. Luxury with edge was becoming the new goal, what we'd later call a sports sedan or Grand Tourer. Enter the Pontiac Grand Am, launched as a new type of performance car, a muscle luxury hybrid. The power of a muscle car, the refinement of a European GT, the comfort and styling of a luxury cruiser. It was a bold idea, but did it work? The Grand Am debuted as a colonnade-style A-body, shared with the Lemons, Chevel, and Cutlass. But Pontiac gave it a distinctive identity. A urethane Endura nose similar to the GTO, body-colored and flexible, no chrome bumper. Slotted taillights, a sloped rear deck, and optional louvered rear windows. European-inspired interior with deeply padded dash, real wood accents, and sporty gauges. Engine options, base engine, 400 cubic inch V8 standard. Top dog, 455 cubic inch V8 with 250-270 horse. Net, available with a 4-barrel carburetor and dual exhaust. High torque for its day, over 370 pound-feet. Available in both 2-door coupe and 4-door sedan forms. Suspension tuning was firmer than a Le Mans, with radial tuned suspension, RTS, that helped it handle more like a European car. The Grand Am 455, when equipped with the big engine, was fast for 1973 standards, capable of 0-60 miles per hour in under 8 seconds. But it wasn't a lightweight street brawler. It weighed nearly 4,000 pounds and prioritized smoothness over raw aggression. Worse yet, 1973 was a brutal year for performance cars. New federal crash bumper regulations made car designs heavier and awkward. Net horsepower ratings replaced gross ratings, making engines seem weaker. Gas prices rose. The Grand Am sold reasonably well in its first year, around 43,000 units, but it never took off like the GTO or Grand Prix had. By 1975, the 455 option was gone, emissions strangled the remaining engines, and the Grand Am name faded after 1975, returning only in the late 70s in a smaller, weaker form. The 1973 Grand Am 455 is rarely remembered in muscle car history, but it deserves more credit. Why? Because it predicted a future. The blending of luxury and performance. The idea of a mature, enthusiast car. The move toward European-style sports sedans in America. In many ways, the Grand Am 455 walks so that cars like the BMW 5 Series, Audi S6, and modern Dodge Charger RT could run. It was just too early, and the market wasn't ready. The 1973 Pontiac Grand Am 455 was bold, fast, refined, and innovative, but stuck in the middle of two collapsing worlds. It was a car without a home. Muscle buyers didn't want luxury. Luxury buyers didn't want muscle. The regulations made both sides harder to satisfy. In the end, the Grand Am 455 was a brave but doomed experiment, a symbol of Pontiac's ambition and its struggle to find relevance as the muscle era faded. Number 9, the 1970 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 429, a rare and powerful car that roared onto the scene during muscle car mania and disappeared just as quickly. Today we delve into the story of the 1970 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 429, a bold, brash attempt by Ford's mid-tier division to carve out a slice of the muscle car market. It was powerful. It was fast, it was loud, and yet very few people bought it. Why? Because by 1970, the American muscle car party was starting to wind down, and Mercury had arrived just as the crowd was heading out the door. To understand the spoiler, we need to look at Mercury's brand position. Mercury sat between Ford and Lincoln in the corporate hierarchy. More upscale than Ford, but not quite as luxurious as Lincoln. Its cars were typically more reserved, conservative, and oriented toward middle-aged buyers. So when Mercury dove into the muscle car wars with a model named Cyclone spoiler, it was already going against the grain. Mercury had built performance cars before, like the Marauder and Cougar, but the Cyclone spoiler was different. This was a pure muscle machine aimed at buyers of GTOs, Roadrunners, and Chevels. The name spoiler wasn't a joke. It referenced Mercury's NASCAR ambitions, where the Cyclone had become a competitive stock car in the hands of legends like Cale Yarborough. The 1970 Cyclone spoiler was the top performance variant of the Cyclone line, and Mercury didn't mess around. This car was built to perform. Aggressive fastback profile with a long hood and short rear deck. Standard front-end nose cone inspired by Mercury's NASCAR racers. Optionally bold stripes and high-impact paint colors. Hood scoops, rear spoiler, and spoiler badging added muscle flair. This car didn't whisper, it shouted. Standard engine, 429 Cobra Jet V8 rated at 370 horsepower. Optionally upgrade, 429 Super Cobra Jet SCJ with solid lifters, 4-bolt mains, and a 780 CFM Holley carb. Horsepower remained officially 375 horsepower, but real-world output was likely over 400 horsepower. Torque, a massive 450-plus pounds-feet. Engine oil cooler, 3.91 or 4.30 rear axle. Stronger internals for serious track duty. The SCJ spoiler was a street-legal stock car, no exaggeration. It could go toe-to-toe with 454 Chevels, 440 six-pack Mopars, and 428 Cobra Jet Mustangs. Heavy-duty suspension and handling package, optionally disc brakes, option ram air induction. In short, the 1970 Cyclone spoiler was a serious muscle car, not a badge and stripe special. Despite its capabilities, the Cyclone spoiler struggled in the showroom. Only about 1,631 spoilers were built in 1970, and only a fraction of those had the 429 SCJ. Why didn't it take off? Buyers didn't think of Mercury as a performance brand. They thought of Ford for affordable muscle, Mustang, Torino Cobra. They thought of Lincoln. 1970 was the peak of the muscle car era, and the market was saturated. GTO Judge, Chevel SS, 454, Plymouth GTX and Roadrunner, Dodge Super B, AMC Rebel Machine, even Mercury's own Cougar Eliminator. The Cyclone spoiler got lost in the crowd, despite its NASCAR pedigree. Insurance premiums for high horsepower cars skyrocketed in 1970. Emissions restrictions were on the horizon. Muscle car buyers were moving to smaller, lighter platforms like the Camaro and Challenger. The spoiler was expensive, heavy, and niche. It wasn't what the market wanted, and sales proved it. By 1971, the Cyclone spoiler was on life support. The fastback styling was toned down. The 429 SCJ remained available, but barely. Sales continued to decline. By 1972, the Cyclone name disappeared entirely, absorbed into the Montego line. The muscle car era was crumbling, and Mercury had neither the image nor the buyer base to keep up. Today, the 1970 Mercury Cyclone spoiler 429 SCJ is one of the rarest and most overlooked muscle cars of the era. Historians now appreciate its legitimate performance credentials, its bold styling, its NASCAR roots, its rarity, especially SCJ versions with drag pack. It may not have been a sales hit, but the Cyclone spoiler was authentic muscle, a true performance car that deserved more love than it got. Number 8. The 1974 Dodge Dart Sport 360, a sleeper muscle car that had performance under the hood, but little else to draw the attention of performance-minded buyers. Today, we examine a vehicle that highlights the contradictions of the early 1970s muscle car era. A car with legitimate horsepower, but almost no street cred. The 1974 Dodge Dart Sport 360 was one of the final gasps of affordable performance before the muscle car era collapsed under the weight of regulations, insurance hikes, and shifting buyer interests. The Dart Sport 360 didn't scream for attention. It barely raised its voice. And yet, beneath its plain Jane styling and bargain basement image, it packed enough punch to surprise even seasoned drivers. So why did it fail to make a lasting impression? Let's break it down. To understand the 1974 Dart Sport 360, we need to look at its roots. The Dodge Dart debuted in 1960, but evolved into a compact economy car by the mid-1960s. In 1970, the Dart was restyled and became one of Chrysler's most reliable, affordable offerings. It was never meant to be flashy, but as the muscle car market matured, Dodge realized there was a growing interest in compact performance. This led to the creation of the Dart Sport, a rebadged version of the former Dart Swinger Fastback. It was designed to be a sportier Dart for buyers who wanted something that looked a bit more youthful and fun. In 1974, Dodge decided to give this modest platform some serious firepower. The 1974 Dodge Dart Sport 360 was a product of practicality meeting performance. Small platform, compact to body, light curb weight around 3,000 pounds, big engine under the hood, a potent 360 cubic inch V8 which was new to the Dart lineup. This wasn't a show car, it didn't wear stripes, wings, or bulging scoops. But on paper, it looked solid, and under the hood, it delivered. The 360 cubic inch V8 was the star of the show. Horsepower, 245 horsepower net. Torque, 320 pounds-feet. Carburation, 4-barrel. Compression ratio, 8.5 to 1. Emissions friendly. 0 to 60 mile per hour, under 8 seconds. Quarter mile, 15.5 seconds. This made the Dart Sport 360 one of the quickest domestic cars you could buy in 1974. And unlike many of its rivals, it didn't weigh 4,000 pounds or cost a fortune. Faster than the Camaro LT, quicker than a 74 GTO, which was now based on the Ventura, competitive with the Mustang II V8, which barely cleared 140 horsepower. Yet, despite all this, the car was largely ignored. The Dart Sport 360 had muscle, but little muscle car identity. Here's why it fell flat. The car looked nearly identical to a base Dart coupe. Minimal visual cues differentiated it from Grandma's grocery getter. Despite its lukewarm reception, the 1974 Dart Sport 360 has earned some retroactive appreciation. What enthusiasts love about it today? Sleeper status. Looks mild, runs wild. A body simplicity. Easy to work on. Parts are relatively available. Undervalued, much cheaper than a same-year Chevel SS or Trans Am. Solid base for drag builds or pro touring conversions. However, they remain under the radar even in collector circles, largely because their original impact was so minimal. The 1974 Dodge Dart Sport 360 was a rare case of function over form during an era when muscle cars were being neutered and glamorized. Dodge quietly slipped real horsepower into a compact, affordable platform, but failed to dress it up or sell it with conviction. It was a car for those in the know, a hidden hot rod that could humble more famous names at a stoplight. But without looks, branding, or buzz, it was destined to fade into the background. Number 7, the 1975 Pontiac Ventura Sprint, exploring its context, engineering, marketing, and why it ultimately failed to revive the muscle car spirit. Today's lecture examines a vehicle that perfectly illustrates the muscle car hangover of the mid-1970s, a time when performance names still existed, but the muscle behind them had faded into memory. Our focus, the 1975 Pontiac Ventura Sprint, a car that carried a performance badge, but not much else. In essence, the Ventura Sprint was Pontiac's attempt to keep the embers of performance glowing, using a compact Nova-based platform and a sporty image. But it landed in a market that was already turning away from horsepower in favor of economy, emissions compliance, and comfort. Let's take a deep dive into why this car was a symbol of a fading era and how even a brand like Pontiac, once known for fire-breathing machines, couldn't reignite the spark. To appreciate the Ventura Sprint, we need to understand what Pontiac was dealing with in 1975. The muscle car golden age was over. Federal emissions regulations and safety mandates were in full swing, Gas prices had skyrocketed after the 1973 oil crisis. Insurance premiums had gutted the youth performance market. Public interest had shifted from horsepower to fuel economy and practicality. GM, like every other manufacturer, was scrambling to adapt. But Pontiac, once the rebellious performance brand of the GM family, was caught in a strange transition, trying to keep muscle car appeal alive while meeting all the new rules. The Pontiac Ventura, introduced in 1971, was essentially Pontiac's version of the Chevrolet Nova. It shared the same X-body platform. It was a compact aimed at younger buyers and small families. Early versions had mild styling differences, but mechanically it was a Nova. By 1974, race 75, the Ventura had become a budget car, often seen as a fleet option or basic transportation. Pontiac wanted to spice things up. Enter the Sprint package. In 1975, Pontiac released the Ventura Sprint package to inject life into the nameplate. Striped graphics and special exterior badging, rally wheels or wheel covers, sporty steering wheel, bucket seats in some configurations, optional sport mirrors, and dual exhaust, depending on engine. But it was mostly window dressing. Under the hood, it struggled to live up to its image. Let's look at what powered the Ventura Sprint. Engine options: base inline 6, 250 cu in from Chevrolet, making around 105 horsepower. Optional V8s, 260 cu in Oldsmobile V8, 110 to 120 horsepower. 350 cu in Pontiac or Chevrolet V8, 145 to 160 sheet. 400 cu in Pontiac V8, up to 185 horsepower, but very rare. Even the biggest engine offered was hamstrung by low compression, emissions controls, and single exhaust setups. These were net horsepower figures. The 1975 Ventura Sprint suffered from a clear identity crisis. It wore racing stripes and badges, but was slower than many station wagons. It was marketed as youthful and sporty, but offered no real performance advantage over a base Ventura. Why did Pontiac do this? To keep showroom interest alive without triggering insurance penalties. To offer a car that looked fast but wouldn't offend regulators or fuel-conscious buyers. Because actual performance development was simply not a priority anymore. Pontiac wasn't alone in this. Ford had the Mustang II Mach 1, Dodge had the Dart Sport, and even Chevy had the Nova SS in name only by this point. The Ventura Sprint didn't make a big splash. Performance enthusiasts ignored it. It was too slow and too soft. Budget buyers didn't care for the sporty trim and higher price. Sales were lukewarm, and there was no cult following. By the late 1970s, the Ventura name was absorbed into the new Phoenix line, and the Sprint trim quietly disappeared. Number 6. The 1971 Oldsmobile Rally 350 Holdover. A car that tried to deliver style and performance on a budget, but ended up as a misfire stuck on dealer lots. Today we explore a bold, flashy, and misunderstood car from the fading twilight of the muscle car era. The 1971 Oldsmobile Rally 350, a holdover from its splashy 1970 debut. Built on the principles of affordability, visibility, and performance, this car was meant to attract young buyers craving muscle without the high insurance costs or big block price tag. But by 1971, it wasn't just misunderstood, it was unwanted. To understand why the Rally 350 flopped as a 1971 holdover, we must look at the environment it came from. By 1970, the muscle car war was peaking. Horsepower was everywhere, insurance premiums were skyrocketing, and manufacturers were pushing the envelope. Young buyers, the prime audience for muscle cars, were finding it harder to insure GTOs, 442s, and SS396. Enter Oldsmobile's bright idea. A small block mid-tier performer dressed up like a big-time muscle car, but aimed at budget-conscious youth. The goal was to offer performance styling without the price tag or the insurance nightmare. Before discussing the 1971 leftovers, let's briefly revisit the original. The 1970 Oldsmobile Rally 350 highlights: engine, 350 cu small block V8, rated at 310 horsepower. Transmission, 3-speed manual standard, 4-speed and turbo hydromatic optional. Sebring yellow paint, everywhere. Body, bumpers, mirrors, spoiler, grille. Black and red decals, blacked out grille, rear spoiler, and fiberglass front air dam. Rally wheels painted yellow. Platform, based on the Oldsmobile Cutlass and F85. Target's audience, younger buyers priced out of the 442. On paper, it seemed brilliant. Style, speed, and insurance-friendly displacement. But sales were lukewarm. Despite heavy promotion, only around 3,547 units were built in 1970. By 1971, Oldsmobile still had unsold Rally 350s sitting on dealer lots. Why? The youth market didn't show up. Insurance was still high, even on small block cars. Younger buyers were leaning toward budget imports or basic V8 Novas and Darts. It looked like a race car, but didn't have the prestige of a GTO, Chevel SS, or even a base 442. The Sebring yellow paint and matching bumpers made it look gimmicky, not tough. Emissions and safety regulations were tightening, gas prices were rising. Buyers were growing cautious. The wild, flashy muscle car image was fading. Oldsmobile didn't formally produce a 1971 Rally 350. The units sold in 1971 were simply unsold 1970 models, holdovers that dealerships couldn't move. They sat, discounted, unwanted, and collecting dust. Let's not forget, Oldsmobile was traditionally a luxury performance brand, skewing older and more conservative. Their buyers didn't want yellow-painted bumpers and racing stripes. Their younger target demographic didn't take Oldsmobile seriously as a performance name. So the Rally 350 sat in limbo. Too wild for Olds fans and too tame for real muscle car fans. It lacked the street reputation of the Chevel, the youth cachet of the Mustang, and the raw edge of a Plymouth Roadrunner. By the time those leftover 1970 Rally 350s were sold off in early 1971, the muscle car era was entering steep decline. Insurance rates, emissions, and fuel prices were reshaping the industry. The Rally 350 was quietly swept aside, never to return. Oldsmobile would continue with the 442, but even that icon would lose muscle over time, becoming more luxury-focused and automatic only by the mid-1970s. Today, the 1970 Oldsmobile Rally 350 has earned a cult following for its uniqueness, fewer than 4,000 made, highly visible paint scheme, an oddball piece of muscle car history. But the 1971 holdover models? They're rarer still. Not because they were special, but because so few people cared about them. These cars are reminders of the awkward transition from bold performance to cautious regulation. They show how image alone couldn't sell a muscle car, especially when it came from a brand that didn't have the street cred to back it up. Number 5. The 1977 Dodge Aspen RT, a car that wore the right badges and stripes, but couldn't live up to the performance legacy it claimed. Today, we're going to explore a car that symbolizes the fall of Detroit's muscle car might into hollow badge engineering, the 1977 Dodge Aspen RT. What we have here is a performance package wrapped around an economy car chassis, delivered in an era when muscle cars were dying and marketing smoke was thick. The RT badge, once worn proudly by Chargers and Coronets that burned rubber and dominated the streets, was now pasted onto a car that couldn't outrun its own reputation. Let's dive into the context, the car, the misfire, and the aftermath of what may be one of the saddest uses of the RT badge in Mopar history. By 1977, the American muscle car was in critical condition. Emission controls, unleaded gas, rising insurance rates, and tightening federal regulations had smothered performance. Detroit's solution? Appearance packages and nameplate nostalgia. Instead of new engineering or meaningful upgrades, manufacturers dusted off once glorious badges like SS, Mach 1, or RT, and slapped them on tame, emissions-choked intermediates or compacts. Dodge was especially guilty of this with the Aspen RT. The Aspen itself replaced the Dart, debuting in 1976. It was boxy, lightweight for its time, and mostly aimed at economy buyers. Yet Dodge's marketing department got the bright idea. Let's make it a performance car. Let's break down what the RT trim meant on the Aspen. Dual color contrast RT stripes on the hood, doors and rear, spoiler on some models, raised white letter tires, rally wheels, RT badging, optionally T-top roof, and blackout trim. Visually, the car was trying hard. At a glance, it looked ready to tear up the strip. But once you opened the hood, the illusion collapsed. The Aspen RT was all about options, not baseline performance. You could order it with 225/6 standard. Yes, the base RT had a 6-cylinder with around 100 horsepower. 318 V8, mild, choked down by emissions. 360 V8, 3-barrel and 4-barrel options, the most common choice. 400 V8, rare, about 180 horsepower, but still sluggish thanks to smog equipment and gearing. None of these engines could deliver the kind of punch people associated with the RT name. Even the 364-barrel only mustered around 170 horsepower, on par with a base Malibu or even a large family sedan. 0 to 60 times hovered in the 9/11 range, and the quarter mile? In the 16s or 17s. That's not muscle, that's marginally adequate. The Aspen RT didn't just underwhelm under the hood, it disappointed at every corner. Shared with the Plymouth Volare weight, the RST badge had once stood for road track. On the 1968 Charger RST, it meant something. On the 1970 Coronet RST, it was a signal of road dominance. By 1977, it was just marketing debris. Mopar enthusiasts didn't respect it, reviewers panned it, buyers looking for real performance went elsewhere. Or nowhere, since the muscle market was on life support. In the long run, slapping RT on the Aspen diluted the brand's performance identity. It made the badge a joke. The Aspen RT sold modestly, about 5,000 to 6,000 units in 1977, mostly to budget-conscious buyers who liked the look of a muscle car but didn't want to pay for a real one. Dodge loyalists who wanted something newer than a dart swinger. Used to be enthusiasts settling for whatever scraps were left after regulations neutered everything. Most enthusiasts skipped the RT and kept their aging Chargers, Dusters, or Roadrunners on the road a few more years instead. The Aspen RST limped along through 1980, getting worse with each year as power dropped further and styling got cheesier. Number 4, the 1973 Chevrolet Chevel SS 454, a car that tried to keep the muscle flame alive as the segment collapsed under its own weight and regulations. Today's lecture focuses on a transitional relic, a muscle car that still carried the firepower of a golden-era engine, but was wrapped in a softer, bulkier, and less focused package. We're talking about the 1973 Chevrolet Chevel SS 454, a car caught between two automotive worlds. This model stands as a symbol of what happened to American muscle cars as they confronted changing regulations, safety mandates, and shifting consumer priorities. It was still muscular on paper, but in reality, the muscle was losing its definition. Let's dig into the background, specs, marketing, performance, and why the 1973 Chevel SS 454 quietly faded into the fog of history. The early 1970s were a time of reckoning for muscle cars. Emissions regulations had begun to strangle engine output. Unleaded gasoline and lower compression ratios were mandatory. Insurance premiums on high-performance cars were skyrocketing. Federal safety standards forced bulky bumpers and crash requirements. Chevrolet knew it couldn't keep selling fire-breathing machines like the 1970 SS 454 LS6 forever. So the Chevel, once a lean, aggressive street fighter, had to adapt to survive. The result was the redesigned third-generation Chevel, and with it, a dramatically rethought SS 454. A complete redesign of the Chevel with a rounded colonnade body style, framed B-pillars instead of true hardtops due to new rollover standards, 5-mile-per-hour crash bumpers, more glass and interior space, making the car feel more like a mid-size cruiser than a muscle car. This new Chevel was heavier and more comfort-oriented. Even the aggressive stance was gone, replaced by soft lines, plush interiors, and a dashboard that looked more at home in a Caprice than a street brawler. The muscle had been domesticated. Despite all the regulation and reshaping, Chevrolet didn't entirely abandon performance. You could still order the SS package, And for 1973, it was more of a trim level than a full-blown performance machine. Base SS engine, 350 V8, yes, the small block. Optional 454 cubic inch V8, but not the mighty LS6 of 1970. The available 454 was the LS4, rated at 245 horsepower, net. It still had approximately 370 pound-feet of torque, but power delivery was dulled by weight and emissions gear. So while SS 454 sounds intimidating, it didn't come close to the raw brutality of earlier 454 cars. The drop in power was staggering. 1970 Chevel SS 454 LS6, 450 gross horsepower. 1973 Chevel SS 454, 245 net horsepower. Net ratings are more conservative than gross, but the drop was still dramatic, and so was the performance. 0 to 60 mile per hour? The SS 454 was no longer a separate model, but an option on the Malibu Coupe. Few people checked the box. Most Chevels sold were powered by 350s or even 6 cylinders. As the years went on, the SS option was dropped altogether after 1973. The Chevel name itself was phased out by 1977, absorbed into the Malibu line. The 454 engine lingered into the mid-1970s, but with further detuning and diminishing importance. The 1973 SS 454 was the last gasp of what once was. It never had a farewell party. No magazine cover, no street legend status. It just faded. So how should we remember the 1973 Chevel SS 454? It's not a bad car. It was comfortable, durable, and offered decent torque, but it failed to live up to the SS legacy. It was too heavy. It was too soft. It was too quiet, both literally and in the public imagination. It wasn't a hero of the muscle car era. It was a victim of its decline. That's what makes it so fascinating. It reflects the tension between past power and present pressures. A car that wore the right badge, had the right engine size, but existed in the wrong time. Number 3, the 1974 Ford Grand Torino Elite. A car that aimed to blend muscle styling with personal luxury, but ultimately failed to resonate with either market. Today's topic is a lesser-remembered entry in the twilight years of American muscle. A vehicle that tried to be many things at once, but never quite nailed any of them. The 1974 Ford Grand Torino Elite. This model is important not because of what it achieved, but because of what it represents. A confused market, a bloated design philosophy, and a manufacturer desperate to keep interest alive as the golden age of performance cars came to a screeching halt. Let's break down the origins, design, mechanical details, market response, and ultimate demise of this oddity in Ford's 1970s lineup. By 1974, the muscle car era was over in all but name. Emissions regulations were strangling engine output. Unleaded gasoline and catalytic converters loomed. The oil crisis of 1973 made big V8s politically and economically unpopular. Insurance premiums on anything remotely sporty were punitive. Most importantly, consumer tastes were shifting toward personal luxury coupes. This was the era of Chevrolet Monte Carlo, Pontiac Grand Prix, Chrysler Cordoba. Ford's traditional mid-size lineup needed something to compete. But instead of crafting a purpose-built personal luxury coupe, Ford attempted a stopgap solution by creating a new model from the bones of the existing Grand Torino. The 1974 Grand Torino Elite was essentially a rebadged dressed-up Torino with styling cues ripped straight from the Thunderbird and Lincoln playbook. Originally launched simply as the Elite, it was labeled in its debut year as the Grand Torino Elite to tie it to Ford's familiar midsize lineup. It would later become its own model, simply called Ford Elite, in 1975 and 1976. Ford called it a blend of performance, prestige, and presence. But let's take a closer look. At a glance, the Grand Torino Elite looked like a Monte Carlo impersonator, a Thunderbird light, a car trying to be upscale but not quite pulling it off, a formal roofline with opera windows, a wide chrome grille with a faux Rolls-Royce vertical bar treatment, hidden headlamps, a padded vinyl roof, body cladding and chrome accents to suggest luxury. However, the Elite also retains some of the muscular curves from the Torino beneath. The result was a visually conflicted vehicle, not sleek enough to be sporty, not refined enough to be luxurious. It sat in a no-man's land of styling confusion. Mechanically, the 1974 Gran Torino Elite came standard with a 351 V8, but you could option up to 400 CID V8, 429 CID V8 for 1974 only. But by 1974, even the biggest engines had been choked by smog controls. The 429 made around 219 net horsepower, and it had to haul a car that weighed nearly 4,300 pounds. Inside, the Gran Torino Elite tried hard to mimic higher-end offerings. Simulated wood grain trim, plush cloth or vinyl seats, full instrumentation, but only on higher trims. Power everything, if you paid for it. But again, there was a disconnect. The car's upscale pretensions were betrayed by its roots. Underneath the fake luxury was a base Torino with slightly nicer packaging. It was all show, very little go, and even less real comfort. The Gran Torino Elite didn't bomb completely. In fact, it sold reasonably well in 1974, mostly to older buyers looking for a Monte Carlo alternative with Ford badging. But it never inspired loyalty or enthusiasm. Critics and muscle fans panned it. Too heavy, too soft, too expensive for what you get. All the flash of a Thunderbird, none of the substance. In 1975, Ford dropped the Gran Torino prefix, rebranding the car simply as the Ford Elite. By 1977, the Elite was gone entirely, replaced by a downsized Thunderbird, which did what the Elite tried to do, but better. Number 2, the 1977 AMC Hornet AMX, a car that represents the awkward, confused end of the muscle car era, when the badge meant more than the performance underneath it. Today, we're diving into one of the more unfortunate attempts to revive muscle car magic in a time when muscle was essentially dead. The 1977 AMC Hornet AMX. This vehicle serves as a perfect example of what happens when marketing outpaces engineering, and when an automaker tries to lean on a nameplate's former glory to sell what is essentially a cosmetic package. AMC, American Motors Corporation, was known for doing more with less. But by 1977, they were doing less with less, and nowhere is that clearer than in the Hornet AMX. Let's break it down: the history, the mechanics, the styling, the marketing blunders, and why this car faded quickly into obscurity. To understand the tragedy of the 1977 Hornet AMX, we have to understand what AMX once stood for. In 1968, AMC released the original AMX, a two-seat performance coupe that genuinely competed with Corvettes and Mustangs. It had big V8 power, aggressive styling, and a racing pedigree. By the early 1970s, the AMX name had shifted to high-performance versions of the Javelin, AMC's pony car. The AMX badge meant something. It meant muscle, speed, and street cred. But by 1974, the Javelin was discontinued. AMC no longer had a performance platform. So what did they do? They dusted off the AMX badge and slapped it on the compact Hornet, hoping no one would notice the difference. Spoiler, everyone noticed. The Hornet was AMC's compact economy-oriented car introduced in 1970, a direct competitor to the Ford Maverick and Chevy Nova. Practical, simple, and relatively cheap. By 1977, with muscle cars fading from the spotlight, AMC decided to create a sporty trim package for the Hornet hatchback. Call it the Hornet AMX. Load it with stripes, spoilers, decals, and aggressive graphics. And hope the AMX magic would return. But let's be very clear, this car had nothing in common with the original AMX. On the surface, the Hornet AMX looked the part, if you squinted. Bold racing stripes and AMX decals on the fenders and hatch. Blacked out grille and rear spoiler. Rally wheels in flashy colors like red, yellow, and white. Hood graphics that screamed performance. But underneath all that flash, it was just a Hornet. The styling tried too hard. It was cosmetic aggression layered on top of a very basic car. If you removed the stripes, you'd be looking at a humble economy hatchback. It was all bark, no bite. The 1977 Hornet AMX came standard with AMC's 258 cubic inch inline six. That's right, a six-cylinder in a car wearing a badge once associated with V8 thunder. Optional engines included 304 SLAD V8 5-liter, the biggest engine available. The inside of the Hornet AMX wasn't fooling anyone either. Some sporty trim and an AMX logo on the dash.
Option tachometer and gauge package.
Vinyl seats with rally pattern stitching, but the overall feel was that of a budget compact. Cheap plastics, minimal insulation, and dated ergonomics. Again, AMC was trying to do muscle on a shoestring, but the illusion didn't hold up under close inspection.
Critics weren't kind.
Magazines at the time called it all show and no go. Performance enthusiasts laughed at the idea that this was an AMX.
Even loyal AMC fans were disappointed. The company had taken one of its proudest badges and turned it into a sticker package.
Sales were predictably weak. The Hornet AMX lasted 1 year only, 1977. After that, AMC quietly dropped the model and shifted focus to the Spirit and Concord, leaving the AMX name to rest.
The 1977 Hornet AMX is largely forgotten today, and for good reason.
It had none of the performance, none of the prestige, and none of the engineering that defined the AMX legacy.
It was the automotive equivalent of putting racing stripes on a shopping cart.
It represented the desperate marketing tactics of an automaker trying to stay relevant as the muscle car era died.
For AMC, this was part of a broader pattern in the late 70s. Patchwork updates, badge recycling, and short-lived special editions that couldn't hide the brand's financial instability.
Number 1, the 1976 Pontiac Lemons GT, an emblematic example of the decline of the muscle car era, when graphics and marketing tried, and failed, to fill the void left by vanishing performance. Today we're examining a case study in muscle car marketing without muscle, the 1976 Pontiac Lemons GT. This car exemplifies how, by the mid-1970s, the muscle car image had been reduced to little more than stickers and chrome trim, with little substance underneath. In the earlier part of the decade, Pontiac had been a leader in muscle. The GTO, Firebird, and Judge had roared through the streets. But by 1976, insurance rates, emission regulations, fuel prices, and changing consumer tastes had brought the era to its knees. In that atmosphere, Pontiac tried to keep the flame alive with cars like the Lemons GT. The problem? There was no fire left, just smoke and mirrors. The Pontiac Lemons had a proud history. Introduced in 1962 as a trim level for the Tempest, it became its own model in 1963. The Lemons was the platform for the original 1964 GTO, the car often credited with starting the muscle car craze. Throughout the 60s, the Lemons and its muscle siblings represented power, youth, and excitement. But by 1973, the Lemons had transformed into a heavier, more luxury-oriented midsize car, reflecting the shift in consumer demand. By 1976, the Lemons line included base sedans, coupes, and wagons. Very little in the way of real excitement. Enter the Lemons GT, an attempt to sell performance through styling. The 1976 Lemons GT wasn't a standalone model. It was a trim package offered on the Lemons Coupe. Its goal? Recapture some of the muscle car market without the expense of real engineering. Here's what the GT package offered. Two-tone paint options, GT decals and stripes along the body, Rally 2 wheels, special grille and trim elements, blacked-out rear panel, reins, sport steering wheel, gauge package, bucket seats with console, optional. It looked the part, but only in the most superficial way. Now let's talk performance, or lack thereof. The GT trim did not come with any special engine as standard. Buyers could choose from Pontiac's lineup of V8s including 250 CID inline 6 base engine, not exactly thrilling. 301 CID V8 standard on most GTs. Optional 350, 400, or even the 455 CID V8, though rare in 1976. But here's the catch. All these engines were severely detuned thanks to emissions equipment and lower compression ratios. For example, the 400 CID V8 made around 180 to 200 horsepower, a far cry from earlier muscle years. The 455, if you found one, barely cracked 200 horsepower in emissions-choked form. And regardless of engine choice, the suspension, brakes, and gearing were not significantly upgraded. Let's put it plainly, the 1976 Le Mans GT was a GT in badge only. GT typically stands for Gran Turismo or Grand Touring, implying a mix of luxury and performance. On this car, it meant decals and a sporty appearance, with no actual go to match the show. Pontiac was playing on nostalgia, hoping that consumers would see the GT badge and remember the glory days of GTOs and judges. But in reality, the Le Mans GT offered no specific performance upgrades, no exclusive powertrains, no memorable driving experience. Even period reviewers commented that the GT package was largely decorative and did not live up to the badge it wore. As you might expect, the 1976 Le Mans GT did not generate much excitement. Sales were lukewarm, and the package was quietly discontinued after a brief run. It failed because enthusiasts saw through the marketing. Buyers looking for comfort chose the Grand Le Mans. Fuel-conscious shoppers went smaller. The true muscle crowd had already given up. By the late 70s, Pontiac was shifting focus to downsized cars, and by 1978, the Le Mans itself would be reimagined as a smaller platform, leaving the GT package in the dust.